Okay, I think we've got everybody back with us now and we're ready to kick off session 2. And so I welcome everyone back to our incubator and hope that you're all comfortable. We've got a very interesting and exciting session 2. We've got 3 speakers. And I'm going to begin straight away with introducing Naomi Spry. Naomi is the mother of twin sons who are both non-verbal, living with autism spectrum disorder level 3. They live in regional New South Wales. Naomi is a Wiradjuri woman and advocates for people living with autism and their carers in a range of roles, including as a carer in New South Wales carer representative. We're absolutely thrilled to have you with us today, Naomi, to give us your critically important insights about living in regional New South Wales. Naomi's talk today is Transitions in the Caring Role, a carer's insight from a regional community. And I'm very happy to hand over to you now, Naomi. Thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Naomi Spry. I am the mother of identical twin sons who have autism level 3 and are non-verbal. Luke and Buddy, that's their names, are now 22 years old. We live in regional New South Wales on the beautiful South Coast in the Shoalhaven area. The transition into the NDIS. We were one of the families chosen to promote the NDIS rollout in our region. The NDIS has been everything I expected. As the boys' primary carer, I have a say in what my boys do and also who supports them. I've found support workers who look at the boys' abilities, not their disability. I've found people that focus on what they can do, not what they cannot do. The only hiccup with the NDIS at the moment is our last 2 plans have been done over the phone due to COVID. I feel it is much better to do it face-to-face, meeting with the NDIS planner. It is important to communicate in person, as over the phone, you just feel like a number with the tick, 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 job done. School, this is a big one for my boys when they were still at school. The boys went to a special needs school in the Shoalhaven. Everything was going well until they hit their teens. My boys were themselves transitioning from young boys into young men. More focus was put on their behaviours. The letters started coming home. Luke did this, Buddy did this. Then the school started to suspend my boys. 1 week Luke, the next week Buddy. This went on. And I even had to leave my work because of this situation. After many meetings with the principal and teachers, and also the Autism Association behaviour therapists, trying to find strategies and solutions, I felt I was getting nowhere. This is when I decided to write to our local MP and ask for a meeting to present my concerns for the school and for my boys' education. The local MP was happy for us to meet and have a talk. I'd done all my homework and when we met, I gave him copies of all the discipline and suspension letters I had received from the school and a letter about my concerns. The MP took it in with open arms and said, I had no idea this was going on. The MP passed my letter on with a cover letter of his to the Education Minister, who at the time was on the TV saying, every child deserves a good education. The MP kept me in the loop and I received a letter saying that the Education Minister had spoken to the principal of the school and things would change. Woohoo, they did. In the last 2 years of their schooling, not one suspension letter or conduct letter was sent home. The school teachers and aides were working with their behaviours, not on their behaviours. This was a big positive change. Transitioning from school. In the last term of their schooling, myself and other parents were invited to visit 5 community participation programs that could be suitable for my boys. I chose one and went with my boys to meet and greet. My boys were welcomed by support staff and other young participants that had known the boys from previous school years. It got me excited to think that my boys would be accepted and have peers in this program. I invited the manager from the CPP to come to the boys' NDIS plan meeting so we could get funding for the program. I was happy to know that my boys' transition from school into the community would be smooth. I was also excited that I would be able to return to work again. I assumed that my boys would be attending and accepted into the CPP. This was not the case. After the first week, it was pulled from us for a list of reasons, one being Lucy needs something a bit easier. I said, what? And left it at that. I tried other CPP programs, but the boys were put in the too hard basket. I'd worked out if you're not mildly intellectually disabled or wheelchair bound, there's a huge gap in this community. So this is where Plan B comes into play. I would start a program with my boys. First, we found a premises. Then I organised structured activities such as cooking, self-care, art, music, sport, bushwalking, beach walking, passes to the PCYC and St George's Basin Leisure Centre. So the boys attend these activities with their support worker. My long-term goal is to set up a program for young autistic adults in our community and present it to the local government. Fingers crossed. My advice to other carers, stay strong and push for what your child or your young adult needs. If you're not happy with what's going on, speak to your local MP. And 3, have a plan B. What keeps me motivated? Watching my boys wake up each morning with a big smile on their face, ready for a new day. This gives me every reason to keep going and to keep being their voice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naomi. What a fabulous venture that you've actually created, and to see that determination the advice that you've given to people here today, to see that lived out by yourself, that determination to actually, get the result that your boys deserve is absolutely inspiring. And what lessons you've learned along the way, and thank you very much for sharing that with us today. I'm sure that will provide great inspiration for people in discussion groups, and we commend you on the work that you've done.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naomi.
No worries. The journey continues.
It does, and we wish you all the best, and we hope we can check in with you again further on in your journey. So fantastic. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move to our second speaker this afternoon, Russ Lewis. Russ is a program coordinator at ACON. A program coordinator for ageing at ACON, a community organisation that supports people living with HIV and people who are sexuality and gender diverse. ACON's Living Older Visibly and Engaged project, the Love Project, a beautiful title, supports older lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender and queer people to lead healthy, active and more socially connected lives. They recently released a toolkit to support people with palliative care and end-of-life decisions. Russ's presentation this afternoon is titled Practical, Financial and Emotional Considerations when Planning for End-of-Life LGBTQ Communities, and how groups and research participants helped to co-design this resource. Thank you very much, Russ. We look forward to hearing from you. And can I just remind other people that are online to just mute your microphones, please? Thank you very much. Over to you, Russ.
Thanks very much, Tish. So yes, I'm Russ Lewis and I'm Program Coordinator for Ageing. My pronouns are he, him. And just to quickly expand on my role, I work with the older lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender and queer community. And I have this wonderful experience of not being a researcher, but being able to work with community all the time. So because the population that I work with is older, I get to have wonderful conversations about many of them being carers for loved ones. So the role really involves engaging community to help support reduce social isolation for those people, and also sort of information development, like the toolkit that I'll be speaking to. Could I start? Next slide. Could I start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land where I live and currently working, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to extend this respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. So I know this is a very lengthy title. I should have thought about maybe cutting it back a little, but I'll be presenting today on the development of the toolkit called Taking Control, LGBTQ+ Toolkit for Palliative Care and End-of-Life Decisions. Within the development of the toolkit, we're able to really tease out a little bit more of the experiences of LGBTQ+ carers that informed the development of this toolkit, and we're able to include a page specifically for carers. So as you've said, a little quick summary of ACON. We are New South Wales leading health organisation specialising in community health, inclusion, HIV responses for people of diverse sexualities and genders. The LOVE project is Living Older Visibly and Engaged. And yes, I agree, it's a wonderful acronym. And I can use love in so many different ways. So it's a really lovely one. The project commenced in 2013 and really was a response to the challenges facing the first generation of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender and queer people being visibly out as they age. And the project, as you said, aims to support older LGBTQ people to live healthy, active and more socially connected lives. Thank you. So taking control, the toolkit, this is really a summary of the process of the development of the resource, including responses from carers identifying as LGBTQ+. Thank you. So research or lack of it, there's limited research into the effective responses that meet the needs of LGBTQ people in end-of-life planning and accessing of palliative care. Despite the devastating impact of HIV and AIDS, end-of-life planning among LGBTQ communities is relatively under-researched, especially in Australia. This lack of research includes an understanding of the experiences of LGBTQ+ carers for LGBTQ+ people and people living with HIV. What we do know in regards to palliative care is with the existing research points to barriers in accessing support, lower levels of satisfaction with services, failure to consider the needs of carers and support networks, lower satisfaction and higher levels of distress and health impacts for significant others and carers. And this is particularly the case in respects to trans and gender diverse people. So the community co-design process, thank you. So as always, we've started with a literature review, which I summarised just briefly then. And then we conducted a consultation process consisting of an online survey, which was distributed through our communities and sector networks. The survey aimed to help us understand the needs of our communities and to inform the development of the online toolkit. We invited LGBTQ+ people living with HIV and carers aged 18+ and living in New South Wales to share their perspectives on palliative care and end-of-life care. A partner steering committee and a community advisory group were formed to support the development and delivery of the toolkit, and we're very grateful that New South Wales, Carers New South Wales was part of the partner steering committee for this project. To best meet the needs of our community, we needed to directly know from them what their main concerns were. Topics included in the questions related to these main areas: needs, challenges, and experiences of LGBTQ plus people in end-of-life planning and palliative care for themselves and as carers, or as carers, who to involve in palliative care planning and decision-making, rates of completing end-of-life planning documents, and knowledge of end-of-life legal rights. So just briefly, demographics for this survey. So we had 171 responses that we could use for analysis across New South Wales. Participation by Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people was consistent with New South Wales population, but unfortunately too small to analyse. Our sample was lacking responses from LGBTQ plus people from multicultural and multi-faith backgrounds, particularly from Greater Western Sydney. Thank you. But we did have a 20% respondents from people living with HIV, which was a great content to the survey. And just over 40% of respondents were living with a disability or chronic health condition other than HIV. So we wanted to really explore the needs of LGBT people how they differ from non-LGBTQ plus people. So the major themes that came from this were families are inherently different for our communities in their structure or who we consider to be our chosen families or logical family. An acknowledgement of the experiences of stigma, discrimination, prejudice, and violence through a trauma-informed lens, and to recognise our resilience. Our genders and sexualities are what makes our communities unique. Palliative care services need to be respectful, recognise us and our needs, be competent, affirming, and safe. Some of the minor themes, social isolation in barriers to our communities, palliative care needs being met, and mental health issues, trauma and substance use are at higher rates in our communities, may impact on the palliative care needs and end-of-life choices. Thank you. So probably the most important part of this presentation, the experiences of carers that we were able to sort of experience on. Not surprisingly, we heard LGBTQ plus people had a long history of caring. Oh, thank you. To the next slide. Had a long experience of caring for our communities, including at the height of the HIV crisis. People who have provided care reported a range of experiences. Some felt support services. Some people felt support services by organisations coordinating palliative care were good. Others reported stigma and discrimination, such as services not understanding or respecting their status as chosen family or partners, and not being offered access to support services for the carer, such as financial and bereavement services, as they were not legally next of kin. Some reported services assuming a person had no religious beliefs due to their LGBTI identification. And I also wanted to sort of just recognise Dana Geller's comments and the 5 points that she made earlier. So as well as sort of loss of control, being disempowered, feeling of guilt and shame, possessing a sense of failure, and having to make forced or negative choices, it seems to be interwoven into these extra experiences of someone that's an LGBT plus carer as well. Thank you. So some of the implications for policy and practice that we were able to assess. Although the scope of this needs analysis did not focus on palliative care workforce, that work's being currently done by the LGBTIQ plus Health Australia. A number of findings related to LGBTQ cultural competency, respect, safety, and where our community members' rights are respected and upheld. The findings of the needs analysis inform the content of the toolkit. The toolkit aims to contextualise end-of-life and palliative care for LGBTQ communities, people living with HIV and their carers. It will encourage people across our communities of all ages to start to engage in death planning and conversations about how we want to live and be celebrated and remembered. Of course, the toolkit is just the beginning. We are aiming to promote through workshops, events and activities, and we actually have our first face-to-face event coming up on the 15th of June, which will be a very intimate sort of community conversation about death and dying and how they can utilise the toolkit. So that for me is about it. The next slide. So the toolkit can be found both on the ACON website and on the Independent Love Project website. It's broken into about 10 pages and lots of interactive content for people to really get sort of stuck into, and we hope and encourage everyone to have a look. And particularly, we've got our page on carers, caring for yourself and being a carer as well. So thank you very much. I'm sorry about that confusion, but we got through it.
That's fantastic, Russ. Thank you. Thank you very much. What a fantastic resource. And also, I think what was really insightful is the process, the co-design process that you went through, but also the lessons that could be learned for other communities as well as the LGBTQ communities. You know, how the lessons that can be learned from that for other communities in the caring space. So really thank you for your insights into that, and what a valuable resource and process that you've been involved in. So really appreciate you sharing that with us today. And I know that will spark some interesting contributions in the breakout group discussion groups as well. We're going to move on to our third speaker in session 2, and that is Emma Kirby from the University of New South Wales. Emma is a Scientia Associate Professor at the Centre for Social Research at the University of New South Wales. She's a sociologist with more than 10 years of experience researching relationships in care and caring, and particularly in contexts of illness. Emma's presentation this afternoon is titled In-Depth Carer Experiences Shared Through Survey Responses, and we welcome you and thank you very much, Emma, for joining us. Over to you.
Thanks, Tish. Hi everyone, I'm really happy to be here and I've thoroughly enjoyed the session so far. I'm speaking to you and coming to you from Gadigal land, so I'd like to start by acknowledging and paying my respects to the traditional owners of that land. Today I'm going to talk about a bit of research that we did last year that is available in a journal article, and if anybody wants a copy of that article, they can either email me on the address on the screen, or the journal article is open access, so you should be able to navigate your way through Google to that paper if you would like to see it. Next slide, thanks. So today I'm going to talk about transitions out of caring from the perspective of many thousands of open free text survey responses from a national survey on what we call informal care endings. So I just want to very briefly kind of articulate what I mean by a care ending in this context. The research outlines various ways that caring ends. That might be the relinquishment of full-time care through admission of the care recipient to residential accommodation or supported accommodation. It might mean the recovery or improvement, however partial, of the person being cared for, or it might be in bereavement. And what we know is that inevitably care ends. And what we try and do in this paper, in the discussion, which I don't really have time to go into today, but what we try to engage with is something that we've been hearing a lot about so far in today's session, which is this idea that there is no such thing as a kind of crisp transition. There is no clear, obvious, clean, linear transition. Things often end in a very complex and prolonged manner. Next slide, thanks. So the piece of research that we did is based on the National Carers Survey 2020. And I'd like to acknowledge both my co-authors from UNSW and the collaborators from Carers New South Wales that were pivotal in this research. Surveys so often focus on statistics, on numbers, and on crunching those numbers to find huge kind of general patterns across the data. And as you can see, there were 7,000 respondents across Australia that responded to the survey. What I was more interested in was the final question to the survey, question 73, which was an optional question where respondents could type or write anything else they would like to tell us about your experiences as a carer. And we got 1,746 responses. Those ranged from anything from a couple of words to several paragraphs. And what we did was a thematic analysis where we essentially kind of went in with no preconceived ideas of what might come through in terms of the themes in these experiences. But what we found were a huge majority of responses that related to how caring might end. So over 500 of the 1,700 responses specifically spoke to fears, concerns, issues of preparation, issues engaging with services, thinking about how caring and experiences of caring might end or did end. So some of the benefits of looking at this kind of free text survey data. The beauty of it is that it's participants' own words. So it's carers' own words. The question is deliberately open, so we can find out whatever is the priority of the carer. So often in research, we go into it with a hypothesis or a particular agenda in mind, and we're asking questions of carers based on what we as researchers think is important. And the beauty of this question is that we get to hear from carers about what they think is specifically important. And it's such a wonderful data set in that carers have gone to the trouble of spending that time after 72 other questions to actually articulate what is really important to them that perhaps hasn't been necessarily represented elsewhere. So what we found were a range of hidden carer experiences. And by hidden experiences, I don't necessarily mean experiences that haven't already been articulated in research or that they're not well known. Many of them are very well known. But what we found was a kind of confessional aspect in many ways to what the carers were saying in response to this question. A lot of the carers obviously found it very difficult to talk to their families, to their loved ones, to their colleagues about how caring might end. And we came up with 3 themes, and these are elaborated on in much more depth in the paper. And so if you want to see some of the excerpts from carers or much more depth, please have a look at the paper. But the first theme is, what if something happens to me? Anticipation and fears for the care recipient. And this, I guess, was a very, very common theme that emerged, a very common comment that really unpacked uncertainty about that transition out of the caring role. Considerable concerns about the future, who might provide care for the care recipient, but also the acknowledgement that institutions and organisations perhaps could not be capable of providing the level of care offered by informal carers. So significant concern that residential care or other forms of formal care may be substandard relative to what care the informal carer was providing at this point. The second theme that came through were concerns related to legacies and consequences, I guess, of the experience of caring itself. So prospects for life after caring for carers. And I'd love to have my own life again. It sounds as if many of the carers were keen to get out of their caring role, but that's not necessarily the case. What this really spoke to was the difficulty, and we've heard this kind of throughout the session so far, the difficulty resolving those transitions in identity, the social isolation that comes with caring, and the fears for the future in terms of employment prospects, in terms of superannuation, in terms of housing, and the precariousness that so many people felt would affect them once their caring responsibilities had ceased. Finally, The third section is titled Care Doesn't Stop, It Just Changes. Responsibility, recognition, and loss. And this really revealed the kind of blurriness in transitions out of care. The notion that for many kind of government organisations, for many institutions, the idea that you can go from being a current carer to an ex-carer or a former carer didn't really articulate or resonate with carers' experiences. So while the state may view you as a former carer, many of the carers were still engaging in significant duties, attending residential aged care daily to ensure that their parent, for example, was having their medication, was eating enough. For many people, the administrative duties of engaging with formal health services and other support services was an ongoing job that was not sufficiently recognised, they felt, in service provision. And so this really speaks to care and recognition and how we categorise and kind of view people as carers, as ex-carers, as former carers, and how in reality, in people's lived experiences, it's just not like that. It's much more messy, it's much more fluid. So finally, I've whizzed through this, hopefully we're still on time. Giving a voice to participants. What we found from really digging deep into these survey responses was that like this kind of question sort of offered an opportunity for people to speak to perhaps private or taboo topics that they felt perhaps a bit guilty about or felt shame around, that they could write down in terms of not having repercussions talking to these issues with family or with friends. It was an opportunity for them to highlight their own priorities in their own words and kind of uncover these various sort of sites for policy and practice improvement and to give people a voice behind the statistics. What these data, I think, really importantly also do is listen to carers in terms of the lack of the transition out of care being a sort of process, but actually being something that was very difficult to prepare for, both in terms of practicalities and emotionally, was something that was quite difficult to navigate through, and then was something that was quite difficult to resolve as it was in the past. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. Wow, what a incredibly insightful set of findings that I think once again are borne out by some of the lived experience that we've heard about today. And I think that it's absolutely fantastic to see the strength of those findings come through in such a well executed piece of work. So thanks for the insights, Emma, in pulling all of those out of the survey responses. So incredibly stimulating findings for us to reflect on. So thank you very much. We're going to, once again, as we did with session 1, move into breakout rooms, and this is where you have a chance to provide your opinion, and your thoughts, and ask questions and hear from each other around what some of the gaps are that you think the gaps in what we've discussed today, and what we further need to understand in terms of transitions in the caring role, things that have not been covered today that you think are going to be useful guidance for policy moving forward, for policy areas and areas for action. Once again, you'll receive instructions on your breakout room. You'll receive instructions on your screen for your breakout room, and after a set time, you will then all rejoin the main meeting room. There'll be a short time where you'll get a warning. If you don't feel comfortable again, please, you're welcome to stay in the main room until we resume. But if you are comfortable, please join in the breakout room and have your say. The discussions in these breakout rooms will inform the sorts of focus areas that we have going forward after today's incubator. I will stop now and allow the admin team to assign the breakout rooms. We're going to have a quick whip around now and hear from the facilitators from each group. So from group 1, can we hear a summary of your discussion, please?
Yes, that's me. So very quickly, we talked about moving into residential care and the emotional and practical relational elements of that being often overlooked. The transitions of moving within and between multiple caring roles where the person has different needs, and also dealing with changes in family dynamics and progressing conditions.
Thanks very much, Sarah. Can we hear from group 2, please? Just a summary of your discussion.
Yep.
Thanks, Michelle.
So one of the overarching things we talked about was the importance of the skills and capacity of the support worker. So because that person is not only supporting and working with the care recipient, but also the carer, the unpaid carer. So we talked a bit about that, about the communication skills, but the ability to provide the support that's needed by those people. And that was really important and possibly really needs to be addressed.
Thanks very much, Michelle. Really important, agree. Can we hear from group 3, please?
Hi, that's me. We were first of all talking that there's clearly gaps in supports for young carers and gaps in support for transitioning into as well as out of the caring role. And we talked more about transitioning out of it today. And very importantly, we talked about a lack of perspective on transitioning of relationships with other people who are not the person that they care for, that carers have that caring relationships not only transform the relationship with the person being cared for, but with other people around that as well. And that's an important aspect that is kind of overlooked.
That whole ecosystem, yes, very important. Thanks, Lucas. Okay, can we hear now from group, I think we're up to group 4, are we?
Yeah, thanks, Tish. Look, we talked, I think one thing that really struck out for me is that carers don't know what they don't know. So we're continuing to face a lot of siloing, a lot of lack of awareness, a lot of hidden carers. If we think about the healthcare system, people going into that system and not being identified as a carer when being in hospital for a couple of days, even before that question's asked or before they can access support. And what we're getting is a lot of policies that are still not translated on the ground in some of those face-to-face services, whether it's health, mental health, the education system, or in the service system.
Yeah, very important feedback. Thanks, Wendy. Can we hear from group 5, please?
Yep. I think that's us. We spoke about advanced care planning, and we spoke about co-design and consultation. So our focus was really on the carer involved with care workers and a formal care system. We finished with a lot of discussion about the just the fictionality of all of that, because we had a number of people who are describing situations where they're officially receiving a care package and there are no care workers to deliver it, so they're still doing it. But we also spoke April raised a great issue of advanced care planning and the difficulty that is to talk about it. It's, in a sense, a new role for carers. It's a new responsibility. And how does a carer raise that with the persons who are affected, who doesn't want to speak about it? And she spoke about the difficulty she had in talking about that. And that raised this whole question of sort of issues that we're avoiding and the difficulties.
Thanks very much, Michael. Very interesting territory traversed in that group. Thank you. And that was group 4. And I think we've just got group 5 left. Or was that group 5?
I think that was group 5.
Group 5, okay. And we have no group 6. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Look, thanks very much for the feedback on those discussion groups. You can see the very diverse kind of areas for discussion that were covered today, and I think that's it really is, I suppose, a reflection of the complexity of this area, which all of you are acutely aware of. We're going to, as you know now, that brings to an end the kind of formal sessions for for the incubator for today. Before we transition to the next stage, I just want to extend a really big thank you to all of our speakers today, and we can all give them in our little icons, we can all give them a clap if we want to Daniela, to Kristen, to Naomi, to Russ, and to Emma. 5 absolutely excellent presentations today, which were incredibly insightful. And we want to thank you for the time that you took to prepare your presentations, and also just thank you for your articulate presentations today, and for sharing with us, some really important experiences and findings from your work. It's an absolute privilege to hear your presentations, and we know that's actually I suppose a really significant thing for you to do, is to share that in these forums. So we are all the richer for having heard your presentations. Thank you to the facilitators today, all of you that have facilitated the 2 group discussions. That was great, and for your report back. And also, I just wanted to shout out to Tian, Sarah, Joanne, and Emily, who are behind the scenes, as well as some other people at Carers New South Wales, who have made this online incubator run really smoothly. We've got 2 things left. Of course, there's now time for a 30-minute break, followed by an optional informal opportunity to continue the valuable discussions from this afternoon. This is in our virtual cafe situation. We welcome you to join us again from 3:30 using the same Zoom link. And it's an opportunity for you to bring along your cup of tea or coffee after you've had a break, to come along and continue some of the connections and the conversations that'll be going from 3:30 to 4:30, and to follow up on things. And importantly, we have our 3rd installment tomorrow of the incubator, which is connecting research to practice. It will start at 10:30 a.m. That's Australian Eastern Standard Time. If you're in the Western States, that's 2 hours later for you. So 10:30 tomorrow, and we really hope that you found today fruitful and informative, and that we look forward to as many of you as possible joining us again tomorrow for session 3. But you'll see some important things up on the screen there for those of you that need to access and would like to take advantage of some of the services that are available. If there's anything today that has raised issues for you, and there are some difficult issues, as you know, that have been traversed today. So please make use of those services that are on the screen now. Can I thank you all for your attendance today and for your participation. This is a very enriching experience for everyone, and I want to thank you all for contributing to that. Go well, stay safe, and welcome back at 3:30 those of you that want to join the virtual cafe for informal discussion, and for others, welcome back tomorrow. And for those of you that can't join us tomorrow, thank you for the time that you did join us for. Bye-bye.